After a lifetime of working hard, there comes a quiet moment when a man finally stops and asks himself if it was all really worth it. Robert Hayes did not remember deciding to slow down. That was the strange part. There was no moment where he told himself, "This is it. This is the day I finally stop." Nothing ceremonial, no inner speech. The slowing happened the way evening settles into a long work day, unnoticed until the light is already different. He was standing in his garage when it began to register. The door was open, letting in the late afternoon air, warm but no longer sharp. The tools were where they had always been: pegboard, nails in small plastic drawers, a faint smell of oil and dust that never quite left the place, no matter how many times he swept. He had come out to fix something minor, a loose hinge maybe, or a handle that had started to wobble. He couldn't remember now. What he did remember was standing there longer than necessary, holding the tool in his hand without using it. That wasn't like him. Robert had spent most of his life moving from one task to the next without much space in between. Factory work taught you that. You learned to keep pace, to stay useful, to notice problems before they slowed the line. You learned that hesitation cost more than mistakes. By the time he became a supervisor, the habit was set deep enough that even at home, he moved with the same quiet urgency. Fix it, finish it, keep things running. But that afternoon, the urgency didn't show up. His shoulder ached, not sharply, just enough to remind him it was there. He shifted his weight and leaned lightly against the workbench. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped. Somewhere down the street, a car passed without hurry. Ordinary sounds, sounds he had lived alongside for decades without really hearing. He looked at his hands. They were larger than most, with thick fingers and knuckles that didn't straighten all the way anymore. There were old marks on them, scars so familiar they no longer felt like memories, just facts, proof of years spent doing what needed to be done. He had once taken pride in those hands, still did, in a way. But standing there, he felt something unfamiliar brush against that pride. Not regret, not exactly, something quieter, something harder to name. Robert was 63 years old. The number had started appearing more often in his thoughts lately, though he never invited it. It showed up in small ways, in how long it took him to get out of bed, in how he planned errands with a little more intention than before, in how the younger men at work didn't ask him how to do things as often, not because he had forgotten, but because they assumed they already knew. He hadn't corrected them. There was a time when that might have bothered him. He had worked hard for his position, stayed late, took the extra shifts, carried the responsibility when others didn't want it. He had believed, without ever saying it out loud, that if he kept showing up, kept proving himself useful, there would be a kind of security in that, a solidness, a sense of being anchored. Now, standing alone in his garage, that belief felt thinner than it once had. Not wrong, just incomplete. He set the tool down and wiped his hands on a rag that had been used too many times to be clean, but still felt right in his grip. The motion was automatic, familiar. It brought a strange comfort, and with it, a small wave of tiredness he could no longer ignore. Not the tiredness of a bad day, the deeper kind, the kind that comes from carrying something for so long you forget when you picked it up. He closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment. Long enough to notice his breathing, long enough to realize he wasn't in a hurry to open them again. That was when the question came, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet thought, settling into the space he had finally stopped filling with movement. Was it all really worth it? He didn't answer it. He wasn't ready to, but for the first time, he didn't push it away either. If these stories feel quiet, steady and familiar, it's because they're written for the season you're in. Subscribe and stay with us, not for answers, but for the kind of stories that know when to slow down. He opened his eyes and looked around the garage again, as if seeing it from a slight distance. Everything was in order. That had always mattered to him, even after the divorce, even after the house grew quieter than he expected. He kept things the same. Order was something you could maintain when other things slipped out of reach. He had never said that out loud, but his habits said it for him. The marriage hadn't ended in shouting or betrayal. It ended the way many long things do, with exhaustion that neither person knew how to rest from. Elaine had once told him, years after it was already breaking, that she felt like she lived beside him, not with him. He remembered nodding at the time, taking it in like feedback at work, something to note, something to improve, but improvement requires time, and time had always been spoken for. He thought of her now without sharpness, just a dull tenderness, a recognition that some things don't fall apart because they're wrong, but because they're unattended. He wondered, not for the first time, whether he had mistaken responsibility for presence, whether providing had slowly replaced noticing. That thought stayed with him as he closed the garage door and went inside. The house was quiet in the way only a weekday afternoon can be. Not the peaceful quiet of rest, but the empty quiet of everyone else being somewhere else. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter, not drinking it right away. The light through the window caught the dust on the sill. He made a mental note to clean it later, then let the thought pass without following it. That, too, was new. Usually, a thought like that would have turned into action, a small task, quickly done, just to feel the satisfaction of completion. But something in him resisted the pull this time, not out of rebellion, out of fatigue. He took a sip of water and leaned back against the counter. There had been signs, he realized. Quiet ones, easy to dismiss if you weren't listening. The mornings when he sat on the edge of the bed, a few seconds longer than necessary. The evenings when he drove home without turning on the radio, the way Sundays felt heavier than they used to, even though they were meant for rest. He had told himself it was age, or stress, or the natural cost of a life spent working hard, and maybe it was all of that. But standing there, he sensed there was something underneath those explanations, something he had postponed looking at because it didn't come with instructions. Robert had always trusted effort. If something mattered, you worked at it. If something broke, you fixed it. If something felt uncertain, you doubled down. That approach had served him well for a long time. It had built a career, kept bills paid, earned him respect. People relied on him, still did. At the factory, when something went wrong, they called Robert. When schedules fell apart, they asked him how to make it work. He carried that role with quiet pride. He never complained about it. Responsibility felt like proof that he mattered, but lately, responsibility felt heavier than it used to. Not unbearable, just dense. Like a coat you forget you're wearing until the room warms up. He finished his water and set the glass in the sink. For a moment, he considered washing it immediately. Then he didn't. He walked into the living room and sat down in the chair by the window, the one he rarely used except on weekends. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees lining the street. The leaves shifted and settled again. He watched them without tracking any single branch. His mind wandered, then paused, then wandered again. He thought about retirement. The word had hovered around his life for years, spoken by others more often than by him. Co-workers joked about it. HR mentioned timelines. Friends asked what he planned to do when the time comes. He never had much of an answer. Work had given shape to his days. Without it, the hours felt too open, too undefined. He had always believed that stopping meant losing something essential, a usefulness, a reason to wake up early, a place where his presence mattered. But now, for the first time, another thought edged its way in. What if stopping wasn't losing? What if it was noticing what had been there all along, waiting for him to slow enough to see it? The idea didn't arrive fully formed. It didn't feel like insight. It felt more like a question that wasn't demanding an answer yet. Just space. He sat there as the light shifted across the room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, unbothered by his pause. Time moved whether he pushed against it or not. That realization should have unsettled him. Instead, it brought a strange calm. Some things don't respond to pressure. He didn't know where the thought came from, only that it felt true in his body, not just his mind. He rested his hands on his knees and let the moment pass without trying to shape it into meaning. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to simply be where he was. Not productive, not improving, not fixing, just present. And for now, that was enough. The chair creaked softly when Robert shifted his weight. He noticed it because the room was quiet enough to let small sounds speak. That, too, felt unfamiliar. His life had been built around noise, machines running, radios humming, conversations overlapping, the steady rhythm of doing. Silence had always been something that waited until later. Later had arrived without asking. He stayed by the window longer than he intended. The light softened, losing its edge. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started and then stopped again, as if even it had decided not to press on. Robert smiled faintly at the thought, though he didn't know why. It felt like recognition, not humor. Eventually, he stood and moved toward the hallway. His steps were slower, not because of pain, but because he wasn't trying to outrun the moment anymore. He paused at the door of the spare bedroom, the one that used to be an office, then became a place for boxes that never quite got unpacked. He hadn't gone in there much since Elaine left, not because it hurt sharply, because it reminded him of intentions that never found their time. Papers stacked neatly on a desk, a lamp that still worked, a calendar from years ago, turned to a month that promised things he couldn't quite remember now. He reached in and turned on the light. The room looked smaller than he remembered, or maybe emptier. The walls were bare, save for the faint outline where a picture once hung. He stood there, hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of the space, not accusing, just present. He thought about how often he had told himself, "I'll get to that later." Later, when work slows down. Later, when things are more stable. Later, when there's time. Later had been a faithful companion for most of his life, always walking just ahead of him, always promising to wait. Now, standing in that quiet room, he understood something without fully forming it into words. Later doesn't disappear all at once. It thins, it becomes narrower, until one day, it's no longer a place you're moving toward, but a line you're standing on. That realization didn't frighten him. It settled him. He turned off the light and closed the door gently, as if not to disturb whatever remained there. Then he walked back toward the living room and picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Outside, the air had cooled. The sky carried the pale colors of early evening. Robert stepped onto the porch and sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. Across the street, a man he recognized but didn't know well was washing his truck. They nodded to each other. No words, no obligation, just acknowledgement. Robert appreciated that more than he would have once. He folded his hands together and let them rest there. He didn't pray in words. He never had much language for that. But there was a quiet awareness that settled over him, something like being accompanied without needing to speak. He breathed slowly, deeply, and felt a small easing inside his chest. Not relief, permission. Permission to not know exactly what comes next. Permission to admit that effort alone doesn't always bring clarity. Permission to rest without calling it failure. Some seasons don't announce themselves. They simply arrive when the ground is ready. He stayed on the porch until the light faded further, until the streetlights came on one by one. When he finally stood to go back inside, he felt no rush. Tomorrow would come whether he prepared for it or not. And for the first time in a long while, that thought did not weigh on him. The next morning arrived the way mornings always had, but Robert felt it differently. He woke before the alarm, as he usually did, yet this time he didn't reach for it right away. The room was dim, the edges of furniture softened by early light. For a few seconds, he stayed still, listening to the house breathe, pipes settling, a distant truck on the highway, the quiet steadiness of a place that had held his life without commentary. He sat up slowly and placed his feet on the floor. There was a time when mornings felt like a test of readiness. How quickly could he orient himself, gather his thoughts, prepare for the day ahead? He used to measure his worth by how little friction he allowed himself. Lately, the friction was there, whether he acknowledged it or not. In the bathroom mirror, he caught his reflection and held it a moment longer than usual. The man looking back at him was familiar, but not in the way a photograph is familiar. This was a face shaped by repetition. Early mornings, long hours, decisions made without drama and rarely revisited. He noticed the gray in his beard, the fine lines around his eyes. They didn't surprise him. What surprised him was the absence of judgment. He wasn't disappointed by what he saw. He wasn't proud either, just aware. That felt like progress, though he wouldn't have called it that. He dressed and went to the kitchen, where the coffee maker hummed softly. The smell filled the room, steady and grounding. He poured himself a cup and sat at the table instead of standing at the counter. Another small deviation, another quiet allowance. Work waited for him, as it always did. Emails, decisions, problems that would need sorting. He wasn't pretending otherwise. Responsibility doesn't evaporate just because a man grows tired of carrying it the same way. But something had shifted in how he held the thought of it. He no longer felt the need to brace himself. At the factory later that morning, the familiar sounds met him at the door, machines in motion, voices calling out updates. The place moved with its usual momentum. Robert walked through it with practiced ease, nodding here, pausing there. People still came to him with questions. He answered them. He still knew what he was doing. But between tasks, he noticed the spaces, moments when he didn't immediately fill the silence, times when he let someone else finish solving the problem. Small pauses where he observed instead of intervening. No one commented on it, no one needed to. During lunch, he sat alone with his sandwich, not out of isolation, but preference. He watched the younger men joke loudly at another table, their energy spilling over in all directions. Once, that would have made him feel separate. Today, it simply reminded him that every stage carries its own tempo. He didn't envy them. He didn't dismiss them. He recognized them. That afternoon, as he signed off on paperwork, a thought crossed his mind. Soft, unannounced. I don't have to prove anything today. The thought didn't make him careless. It made him precise. He did his work with the same integrity he always had, but without the added weight of needing it to justify his existence. When the day ended, he left on time. At home, the porch welcomed him again. The light was different now, warmer, slower. He sat in the same chair as the day before, hands folded, breathing evenly. A sense of continuity settled over him, not routine, rhythm. He thought of Elaine briefly, not with longing, with gratitude for what had been and acceptance for what hadn't lasted. He thought of his daughter, grown now, living her own life. He made a quiet note to call her soon, not because time was running out, because presence mattered. Some things don't return when chased. Some things arrive only when invited. As evening settled, Robert felt something loosen inside him. Not a knot undone, but a grip relaxed. He didn't know exactly what the coming years would look like, He didn't need to. He was still responsible, still capable, still steady, but he was also allowed to be human, and that realization stayed with him as the light faded, not as an answer, but as a companion, walking beside him into whatever came next. Unhurried and enough, Saturday came without the usual sense of relief. Robert noticed that first, for most of his life, weekends had been something you earned, a pause justified by endurance. Even then, they were often filled with chores, repairs, errands, a different kind of work that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. Rest had always needed a reason. This Saturday felt different. He woke later than usual. The light already settled higher on the walls. For a moment, he didn't know what time it was, and instead of reaching for certainty, he let the not knowing linger. His body felt heavy, but not burdened, more like grounded. He made coffee and carried the mug outside, sitting on the porch while the morning was still undecided. A bird hopped along the railing, pausing now and then, as if listening for something Robert couldn't hear. The air smelled faintly of damp earth. It had rained overnight, enough to soften the ground, but not enough to announce itself. He sipped slowly. There were things he could do today. A list still lived somewhere in his mind. Small repairs, phone calls, tasks that had been waiting patiently. He didn't deny their existence. He just didn't feel compelled to obey them immediately. That, too, was new. After a while, he stood and walked down the steps, moving toward the yard. The grass was cool under his shoes. He noticed places where it had grown uneven, spots he would usually mark for trimming. Today, he let them be. There was a quiet dignity in things being slightly unfinished. Near the back fence stood an old oak tree. It had been there longer than the house, older than his memories of the place. He had trimmed around it for years, careful not to damage the roots. It never grew in a hurry, never apologized for the shade it took up. Robert stood beneath it and rested his hand against the rough bark. He thought about all the years he had believed strength meant pushing through, that stopping was a kind of weakness, that rest had to be earned again and again. Those beliefs hadn't ruined his life. They had built it, in many ways. But standing there now, he understood something gently, without argument. Strength changes shape over time. What once required force now required honesty. What once demanded endurance now asked for attention. He closed his eyes, just briefly, not in prayer as he had been taught, but in quiet acknowledgement. A sense of being held in something larger than his effort passed through him, subtle, steady, without instruction. He felt no need to name it. When he opened his eyes, nothing had changed, and yet, something had. He went back inside and sat at the table, pulling a piece of paper toward him. He didn't write a list, he wrote a name, his daughter's. He stared at it for a moment, then picked up the phone. The call wasn't long. It didn't need to be. They talked about ordinary things, work, weather, plans that weren't fully formed. There were pauses, comfortable ones. When they hung up, Robert felt no sense of accomplishment, just connection. The afternoon passed quietly. He fixed one small thing in the house, slowly, deliberately. He left another undone. The balance felt right. As evening approached, he returned to the porch and sat again, watching the light thin and stretch. He thought about the years ahead, not with fear, not with certainty, with steadiness. He understood now that what truly mattered had never been hidden. It had simply required space. Space he hadn't known how to allow himself before. The work had been honest. The effort had been real, but life was asking something different of him now, not more, just closer. As the day settled into night, Robert felt a quiet confidence take root, not the loud kind that demands proof, but the grounded kind that comes from finally standing where you are. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel behind. He felt on time. Sunday morning arrived without ceremony. Robert noticed the quiet first, and then noticed his own unease with it. He woke without the alarm, the room still dim, the outlines of familiar furniture softened by early light. For a moment, he lay there listening to the house settle, pipes clicking faintly, a car passing somewhere far off, the kind of stillness that used to make him restless if it lasted too long. He waited for that restlessness to push him up. It didn't. That unsettled him more than he expected. He sat on the edge of the bed, feet on the floor, and felt the urge, small but recognizable, to assign himself something, anything. A reason to move, a justification for being awake. The habit rose on its own, practiced and efficient. He let it pass. In the kitchen, he made coffee and carried the mug outside. The sky was overcast, a flat grey that refused to dramatize the morning. He sat on the steps instead of the chair, elbows resting on his knees, the warmth of the cup steady in his hands. There was a church a few miles away. He thought of it without planning to go, just a passing awareness. He hadn't left faith behind. It had simply grown quiet alongside him, less spoken, less organized, more patient than he had been. For a moment, he wondered if he should feel something stronger about that. Guilt, maybe, resolve, direction. Nothing came, only a sense of being seen without being summoned. He bowed his head slightly, not in prayer the way he'd learned years ago, but in acknowledgement, as if responding to a presence that didn't require explanation or performance. The moment held, then loosened, like a hand that didn't insist on being held back. Breakfast was simple. He ate slowly, aware of how often he used to rush even on days meant for rest. Later, he walked a short distance down the street. The neighborhood felt unchanged. He was the variable now. In the afternoon, sitting by the window, a familiar doubt brushed against him. Is this enough? Not enough work? Not enough planning? Not enough certainty? The question didn't accuse him. It simply hovered. He didn't answer it. He watched the light move across the floor instead. Let the question stay unanswered. Let the day remain unclaimed by conclusions. By evening, the doubt had not disappeared, but it had softened. It no longer needed his attention. He understood then that peace wasn't the absence of old habits returning. It was choosing, quietly, not to follow them every time. When night settled in, Robert turned off the lights and stood for a moment in the darkened room. Tomorrow would come. The questions would too. He didn't need to outrun either. Some seasons don't move when pushed. They wait for a man to stop proving he deserves to be there, and Robert, at last, was learning how to stay. Monday returned the way it always had, without asking how he felt about it. Robert rose early, the habit still intact, but there was a faint resistance now. Not enough to stop him, just enough to make him aware of the choice. He noticed it as he dressed, as he tied his shoes, as he stepped into the morning air. The day no longer pulled him forward. It waited. At the factory, everything moved at its usual pace. Machines ran, schedules pressed, voices overlapped. Robert stepped into it with the familiarity of someone who knew where the floor might give and where it wouldn't. People still came to him. He still answered, but he no longer felt responsible for absorbing every edge of the day. Late in the morning, Mark stopped by his desk. "Can I run something by you?" he asked, papers in hand. Robert listened as Mark explained the situation, staffing issues, timelines, pressure from above. It was the kind of problem Robert had solved 100 times before. He felt the old instinct rise, ready to organize, decide, carry it to completion. For a moment, he almost did. Instead, he asked a question Mark hadn't expected. "What do you think you can live with if nothing changes right away?" Mark hesitated, then answered slowly. When he left, he looked lighter, though nothing had been resolved on paper. Robert sat there for a moment after, aware of what he had not done. He hadn't taken the problem from him. He hadn't proven his usefulness. The realization brought a brief flicker of unease, a sense of stepping back from a role that had defined him for years. He stayed with that feeling until it passed. That afternoon, HR called him in. They spoke about timelines, possibilities, flexibility. The words were neutral, careful, respectful. As they talked, Robert felt the familiar pressure begin to form, the urge to decide, to secure the next chapter before uncertainty could settle in. He nodded. He listened. And when the conversation ended, he walked back to his desk without having chosen anything. The door had opened. He felt its weight. That evening at home, the quiet felt different. Not entirely settled. Not uncomfortable either. He cooked, ate, and cleaned up without rushing. Later, standing by the window, he felt the tension between who he had been and who he was becoming stretch, then hold. He understood something then, not as a conclusion, but as a limit he no longer needed to cross. He didn't have to answer every invitation immediately. He didn't have to define the next season before it arrived. As he turned off the light and lay down, the questions remained, but they no longer demanded his obedience. Monday had returned, and for the first time, it had not taken him with it. The days that followed did not feel new. That, more than anything, told Robert he was changing. Nothing announced itself. No moment stood apart and asked to be remembered. The work continued. The mornings arrived. The evenings closed in the same familiar way. And yet, something in how he moved through it all had shifted, subtle enough that only he would notice. One evening, he found himself back in the garage. The door was open, just as it had been that afternoon weeks earlier. Late light rested on the workbench, catching the edges of tools that had shaped much of his life. He picked one up, the same one he had held without using, and turned it slowly in his hands. It still fit. That surprised him. He hadn't lost anything by setting it down. His hands remembered what to do. His strength was still there, waiting without complaint. The difference now was not in his ability, but in his willingness to let the tool rest until it was needed. He placed it back where it belonged and leaned against the bench, feeling the familiar ache in his shoulder. He didn't resent it. The ache felt like history, not warning. For a moment, he thought about all the times he believed stopping meant falling behind, how he had measured his life by motion alone. Standing there now, in the same place where the question first surfaced, he understood what had taken him so long to see. He had never been behind. He had simply been early to arrive everywhere else. Inside the house, the evening waited. The porch light would come on soon. Tomorrow would bring its questions. He would meet them when they came, not before. Robert turned off the garage light and closed the door gently. He had spent his life working hard. That was true. But what truly mattered had not been built by his hands alone. It had been forming quietly in the spaces he was finally allowing himself to inhabit, and as he walked back inside, he felt no urgency to move faster, no need to explain where he was headed. He was already there. If this story stayed with you, it may be because it touched a place you don't often name. Not exhaustion that comes from failure, but the quieter kind that comes from having carried things well for a long time, from being reliable, from showing up, from moving forward even when no one was watching. There are seasons when effort no longer brings clarity, when slowing down feels unfamiliar, even undeserved, when the questions aren't loud, but they don't leave either. This space is for that season, not to rush you toward answers, not to tell you what to change, just to sit with the weight until it loosens on its own. If you felt understood here, you're welcome to stay, subscribe, and walk a little further with these stories. The next video waiting on your screen carries another life, another moment of arrival. It may meet you in a way this one couldn't, and help you recognize where you already are.